Hello and welcome to episode 89 of 10,000 Stitches podcast, a weekly chit chat all about the joys of knitting. My name is Andy and thanks for joining me this week. If you were looking for me on the interwebs, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Ravelry as Purlbug, P-U-R-L-B-U-G. You can find my blog at thepurlbug.com, and then we have the 10,000 Stitches podcast group on Ravelry. If you're looking for links to anything that I mentioned today, shops, patterns, what have you, if you are watching this via the embedded video on the blog post or the Ravelry thread, everything will be linked right below the video. If you are watching this on the YouTube channel, in the description box below the video, there will be a link to the blog post for this episode, and then, like I said, everything will be linked right below. I am currently recording on Sunday, March 4th, and this episode will go up on Tuesday, March 6th. This is my second time trying to record this first clip because the last one just went really bad, so I just need to slow down and think more about what I'm saying, and you'll understand why in just a minute. But we're going to have a fairly normal episode today. I will talk about finished objects, works in progress, what's coming up next. I have some dyeing to show off. We'll talk about knit-alongs, we'll do question of the week, and then we'll do chit-chat. So yeah, let's see if things go better the second time. So I have one finished object to show you guys, and that is my Knit Like It's 1999 socks. Wah! I talked a little bit about these last week, but these are a pair of socks that are being knit for a friend of mine who happens to have feet that are roughly the same size as mine, so that makes knitting them a whole lot easier. But yeah, the pattern is Knit Like It's 1999. The yarn that I used for this is a Gales Art double knit sock blank in the Rockstar Rainbow colorway. And as you can see, it's this crazy rainbow. I talked about this last week, but so it's a double knit sock blank. I painstakingly unraveled it and separated out the two strands so that I could knit with them separately and so that I could do the rainbow in reverse order like you see here. So these obviously don't match because one of the strands from the sock blank I wound up in reverse order of the other. So let me plop one of these guys on a sock blocker so you can see sort of what it looks like. The stitch pattern for this is pretty similar to the speckled space socks. So if you've knit that one, this one shouldn't be too challenging. I mean, it's not like it's challenging regardless. But yeah, and then like I said last week, I did not do the patterning on the back of the leg. I did the back of the leg plain and then only did the patterning along the front. And fish lips kiss heel in just sort of a black yarn that I had, just because I didn't want to sort of mess up the rainbow pattern. And yeah, otherwise I'm pretty pleased with it. They were a lot of fun to knit, and I'm excited to gift them to my friend. I'm actually going to see her tomorrow, so I will probably give them to her tomorrow. But yeah, no complaints. Really fun pattern. Would knit again. So that's my my finished object. Yeah, I guess not really that much to say about them. I will say I knit the 68 stitch size on US 1.5 or on US 1s, which are 2.25 millimeter needles. This pattern is really cool because it comes in a pretty big range of like stitch count sizes. So that was really nice. And I did the 68 stitch size just because these don't have a gusset with them, so I figured they should be just a little bit roomier than maybe a 64 stitch sock. So that's that. So yeah, let's talk about my works in progress. One of them I don't think has moved at all since I talked to you guys last week, which is really disappointing because I have so little left to do for it, and that is the baby booties that I am making for a friend of mine. As a reminder, these are I think it's the Blue Steps little baby booties. This is the one that was finished last week. And how cute is that? Just so little and so cute. And then the other one, I really don't think I touched it all week. Like this is where I am. So I'm pretty sure this is exactly where I was when you guys saw it last. Oh, come on. So that's where I am on that one. As a reminder, this is some hand-dyed yarn that is left over from from a previous pair of socks that I made, and the only modifications I'm making to the pattern are just that I'm knitting it on a US 2, which is a 2.75 millimeter needle instead of a US 1.5, because I am such a tight knitter and I did not want to risk these things being too small. So yeah, that's a work in progress that has had no work done on it, and it's seriously, I could finish this in probably an hour if I really wanted to. I just need to like do it. So maybe I'll try and do that today. So yeah, so then my other big sort of work in progress. So this is, well, not really big. Once I finished the Knit Like It's 1999 socks, which I did yesterday morning, I right away wanted to cast on another pair of socks. And I figured that it was about time that I knit Wesley another pair of socks. I am knitting him another pair of socks. And this yarn is the yarn that I got at the at Vogue Knitting Live 2018. It's from, let's see, Yokogani Yarns. This is their Mon sock base, which is a 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, 460 yards per 100 grams. And this is a one-of-a-kind colorway called Riverfish. So I'll show you the ball of it first. So that's what the ball looks like, and it's sort of this brown gray color with little pops of red, and you can kind of see that a little bit better in the sock itself. Unfortunately, the red shows up on camera, I think, way more than it does in real life, but regardless. So this is what the yarn looks like knit up. So yeah, the red is not really that distinct in real life, or else Wesley would not like it very much. But yeah, I'm really loving it. This is a little bit more, like, it's not a super soft merino, which I find really interesting, is that like every so often I'll come across a base which is, you know, 75-25 merino nylon base, but like some of the merinos don't seem nearly as soft as others, which I kind of like. I like a little bit grabbier merino. Like sometimes they just seem a little bit too slick and too soft. So this one's really nice because it's just a little bit grabbier. And the patterning that I'm doing along the top of this is the same as the last pair of socks that I knit Wesley, which I am calling my man friend socks. And I'm knitting these with that pattern because I actually want to publish that pattern, you know, just as a free pattern, and I want these to be the sample socks. So this is a 70 stitch sock knit on a US 0, which is a 2 millimeter needle. Everything else is sort of my standard for how I knit socks for Wesley. And yeah, I'm excited. This one, I mean, because it's such a short sock, like it's really flying. Like I'm almost done with the gusset and I just started it yesterday. And yeah, like I said, I hope to get this done and get a pattern published for this sooner rather than later. But I'm just hoping that he'll like them. I mean, he likes all the socks I make him, so I'm not that worried. But yeah, I'm hoping, like I said, the red is not nearly as distinctive in real life as it is on camera, but I mean, you do still notice it, so I'm hoping that it doesn't turn out to be like too much color for him. But otherwise, pretty basic sock for the Wesley. So before I move on to talking about what's next, I wanted to address a question that I got via email through my blog yesterday. And by the way, if you, you know, I mean, obviously, if you have questions, feel free to leave them in the YouTube comments or in the Ravelry thread or blog comments. You know, no matter what, I'll wind up seeing them. But if you have maybe a little bit longer question or a question that you think, you know, is a little bit more personal or whatever, there is a contact page on my blog. It's just a little form that you fill out, and that sends it directly to my email. So that's always an option too. So this is an email that I got from a viewer named Kay. Hi. And she was asking about basically how to knit non-standard sock sizes, and you know, asking for some advice on this and like how to just deal with the fact that most patterns aren't written for this. And I thought I would address it on the podcast, just because I know that it's a question that I had, and hopefully I can help other people. So there's sort of three ways that I would or three things that I thought about when I was thinking about how to answer this question. So first of all, the standard sort of sock sizes are, I mean, I guess the standard is sort of 56, 64, and 72 stitches. That's the sizes that my sock pattern is written for, which we'll get to a little bit later. But that's sort of the sizes that I wrote for. That's what most patterns are written for. It's pretty rare that you see patterns that are written for other sizes. And I think that's just a matter of convenience. Those sizes, those numbers happen to be divisible by 8, which means that if you are knitting on 2 circulars or magic loop, right, it's nice because they're divisible by 2, right? So it splits evenly onto each needle. And also if you are knitting on DPNs, on 4 DPNs, it splits evenly and gives you an even number of stitches on each needle, right? That's the importance of being divisible by 8. But you know, if you've been around for any length of time, you know that I frequently do not knit socks in those sizes. Actually, both of the adult size socks that I showed off today are not in those sizes, right? I have a 68 stitch sock and a 70 stitch sock. So I wouldn't call myself an expert on how to knit socks in weird sizes, but I have some experience, so hopefully I can help. And hopefully all the numbers don't get too confusing. Yeah, so first of all, a little bit of terminology on sort of how I think of socks is I always think of socks in halves, right? I think of what I call the front half and the back half. And again, this is how the pattern that I wrote is sort of phrased, but basically and this is of course so not the right yarn to be showing this with, but if you can sort of see my needles here, right? So this is the front part. Here we go. There we go. This is the top part of the sock. This is the part that would be on the front of the leg if it had a longer leg, and then also goes along the top of your foot. And the stitches that make up this half of the sock are what I would call the front stitches. And then you have the half of the sock, which would be the back part of the leg through the heel turn and the bottom of the foot. And then those half are what I call the back stitches. So I will always sort of think of things in terms of front stitches and back stitches because I knit my socks either magic loop or with 2 circulars, but the same applies if you knit with DPNs, right? We still sort of divide up onto your DPNs so that half of your, the top half of your foot is on 2 needles and the bottom half of your foot is on the other 2 needles, right? So same sort of concept of front and back stitches. So I think and of course, all of these suggestions assume that you have knit at least one sock before in one of the standard sizes, and you sort of have some idea of how to knit socks. Because if you hadn't knit a sock in one of the standard sizes, how would you know that you need a non-standard size, right? So I'm assuming you at least know the basic mechanics of knitting a sock. But sort of one of the ways that I've done this before, and I think maybe the way I would suggest starting with, is to think about, can you split up your front and your back stitches in such a way that at least the side that you're doing your heel turn on is a standard number of stitches? Because except for the heel and the toe, everything else about a sock you're just knitting a tube, right? So it doesn't really matter how many stitches it has. The only place where the math gets a little bit tricky is the heel and the toe. So for example, a 68 stitch sock. If you take a 68 stitch sock and you divide it evenly onto 2 needles, as if you're doing a magic loop, right? You divide your front and back evenly, you wind up with 34 stitches per needle, which is totally fine until you get to a heel turn, and then you're like, oh shoot, right? This is not how my pattern is written. And if you're trying to follow a pattern exactly for how to do a flap and turn and gusset style heel, it can get confusing if you don't have exactly the same number of stitches as them, right? Trying to fudge that math doesn't always work out well. So instead of dividing up, say, a 68 stitch sock into 34 and 34, try dividing it up into non-even numbers or non-identical numbers, right? So maybe do 36 and 32. Right? Because then both 36 and 32 are half of the total number of standard sock sizes, right? So 32 would be half of a 64 stitch sock, 36 would be half of a 72 stitch sock, right? So regardless of how you mix those up with the front and back, right? Let's say you did 32 on the front and 36 on the back. Well, then when you get to the heel turn, just follow the heel turn instructions for a standard 72 stitch sock, right? Because it's going to be exactly the same. And then, you'll pick up your gusset stitches like normal. And then you do your gusset decreases until you're back to 36 stitches, right? The same number of stitches you started with. Same way if you wanted to do it the other way, right? Put 32 stitches on your back needle. Well, now just follow the instructions for a standard 64 stitch sock turn, right? Pick up your gusset stitches and then decrease your gusset until you get back to the original number of stitches, which is 32. Right, so that's one way to do it, and that doesn't work only for 68, right? You could do the same thing for 70, right? So maybe then you would do 36 stitches on the back needle, right? So that you can do a standard 72 stitch heel turn and everything. And then you'll have 34 on the other needle. Because if you have 34 on the top needle, it doesn't really matter because you never change the number of stitches on your top needle until you get to the toe, or front needle, sorry. And then dealing with that at the toe, if you have unevenly divided your stitches between your needles when you hit the toe, that's just a matter of saying like, oh, I just need to decrease a couple rows, ahead of my toe on one of the needles, or maybe you can just reshuffle them around so you have an even number of stitches, right? But that's not as big of a deal because there it's just like, oh, decrease until you have the same number of stitches on both and then do a normal toe. So that would be the first thing I would suggest starting with, is try and figure out if you can divide up your stitches such that, at least where you're doing the heel, you have a standard stitch count. Of course, that wouldn't work for something like this sock, where this is a 70 stitch sock and I have divided them up evenly, so I have 35 on each, right? So that is sort of like pro level, non-standard sizes, because then you do have to figure out the math for the heel turn and everything kind of on your own. And I'll get to that in a second, how you can do that. But the first thing I would suggest is basically just try and fudge it so that you can, at least where it really matters, follow normal stitch counts. So let's say you've done that, right? Let's say, or let's say you figured it out such that you're gonna do a different sort of heel turn. But so now let's say you took a 68 stitch sock and you divided it evenly, right? You're like, okay, 34 on each needle, right? Off the heel turn, I'm going to figure out some other time, right? But now you have 34 stitches on each needle. And let's say you want to put in a stitch pattern, along the front of the sock, which is something I often do. But let's say that you're using a pattern that's written for, the standard sizes, right? So 56, 64, 72. So what you would do then is you would basically take the panel that would go along the front of the 64 stitch sock, right? So which will be at most 32 stitches wide, right? If the stitch pattern that goes on that sock covers the entire width of the front of the sock, then you will have a 32 stitch panel. And you're like, well, how do I make that fit? I have 34 stitches on that needle. Well, at that point, just add some stockinette padding along each side, right? So if you have a 32 stitch panel or pattern panel, we'll just add one knit stitch on either side, right? It doesn't matter. Nobody's going to notice because it'll blend into the stockinette of the rest of the sock. I've done this before, if I maybe come across a pattern that's only written for one size, like every so often you'll find that where a sock pattern might only be written for, say, a 64 stitch size, but you're like, I want to do a 72 stitch sock. Just add some padding on either side of that pattern panel and it'll be fine, right? So if you are, let's say, putting a 32 stitch pattern down the front of a 32 stitch pattern down the front of a needle which has 36 stitches on it, well, you just add 2 knit stitches on either side, right? No big deal. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully all of this has made sense so far. I think the key thing too is to realize, right, start with vanilla, right? If you're doing this and you want to knit non-standard sock sizes, start with vanilla until you kind of figure out what you're going to be doing. And also be prepared for it to maybe not go well the first couple times, right? I know I make it maybe sound super easy, oh yeah, you just do this. And it's not, right? I've had a lot of failed socks. So don't forget, right? People who make it look easy, it's not that it's easy. It may be easy now, but it took a lot of failures to get to the point where it seems easy. So those are sort of 2 suggestions that I have for kind of how to do non-standard sizes. So then my last suggestion is a little bit of a shameless plug for my own sock pattern, right? So I mentioned this last week, but I recently put out my own vanilla sock pattern, which is called Exceedingly Vanilla Socks. And it's basically sort of my recipe that I've come up with after knitting a zillion socks, since I started this podcast. And that, of course, is written for the standard sizes, right? 56, 64, 72. Because like I said, those are pretty easy sizes to write for and easy to do everything with. But something I had totally forgotten until I got this email is that when I was writing up the initial draft of this pattern, I also wrote up another draft of it, which is meant for any size, right? As long as it's an even number of stitches, right? It doesn't matter if it's even and divisible by 8 or divisible by 4 or whatever. As long as it's an even number of stitches, it will work for any size. And it's maybe not as much of like a hand-holdy kind of pattern, right? Like it's much more assuming that you kind of can read between the lines in some places and kind of fill in the gaps and know like, oh, okay, I'll just keep doing this until whatever. But it is meant to sort of give you at least a basic guidance on how to do non-standard sock sizes and sort of the math that I use, and it's not hard math, I promise, right? The math that I use to be able to do, you know, like a 34 stitch heel flap and heel turn, right? Without having to make it fit into one of those other sort of standard sizes like I was saying. So all I need to do to get that publishable is just, you know, make it look like, format it properly, and then it will be done, right? It's written and it's done. So I will do my best to get that done before the end of the day today, and I will probably just add it onto the blog post that has the other versions of the pattern, right? So I have sort of the standard version of the pattern, I have the condensed standard version, and then I will also have this non-standard version. And I'll just add it to the same place, so you can go to this, you can follow the same links and get it from the same place. It'll of course be labeled appropriately. But that might be a good thing to try if you know that one of the standard sizes maybe doesn't fit you all that great and you just need some guidance on like, okay, what do I do now? How do I make this work? This should hopefully help. So I will of course link to the pattern page so that you can go find that if that's something that you want. And hopefully that helps you, Kay, and hopefully it helps anyone else who maybe is struggling with not fitting the standard sizes so well and wanting something, you know, in between. So we'll see. But yeah, that's sort of that. Hopefully that was not too confusing. That's what screwed me up when I tried to record, and the first clip initially was just getting screwed up with all the numbers. So hopefully it made sense, and hopefully, you know, if you're one of those people, then the sort of non-standard version of my vanilla sock pattern will help at least get you started, and then, you know, from there you can achieve sort of the boss level feats of adapting, you know, patterned socks to fit a non-standard size. All right, so let's talk a little bit back to the knitting about what's going to be coming up next. So I want to, you know, whatever. I want to get those socks for Wesley finished. I was going to pick it up to show you, but now it's out of my reach. I want to get those socks for Wesley finished, but I also, like I mentioned, this week is spring break here at VCU, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of traveling to go see some family, and you know, so I'm gonna want to have some knitting to take with me. Oh my gosh, cutting off circulation in my feet. I'm gonna want to have some knitting to take with me, but I'm not entirely sure that I want to take those socks with me, just because the yarn is a little bit darker, and I typically have a fair amount of confidence working with dark yarn and not worrying about like dropping stitches or anything. But you know, when you are traveling and maybe the lighting isn't going to be the best and stuff like that, like I just don't want to risk it. So I will probably cast on a pair of vanilla socks or a pretty easy pattern, but I haven't really decided what yet. I did talk last week about like socks that I want to get made, so it'll probably be maybe one of those, but I just haven't quite decided yet what it's going to be. So I guess you guys will figure it out when I figure it out. But yeah, I guess that's going to be it for sort of the what's coming up next is like, I don't know. I guess we'll figure it out. So let's talk about some dyeing then, shall we? So some of this is not super recent, but last week I talked about getting that yarn from Knit Picks, you know, to try my hand at dyeing some of their different bases. And I had mentioned that I had actually dyed a couple of them already, but that they were still wet, and so I couldn't show them off. So now everything is dry, so I can show you guys what I've been doing. So this is one of them. This is on their Hawthorne Fingering, which is a 80% superwash Highland, 20% nylon. And this is sort of just a sort of minty green color, which as we know is one of my like just favorite colors. So that's that one. It took pretty evenly. So I think this will be good for a pair of socks that really sort of needs a, you know, solid color. But yeah, I'm just super duper excited about this one. This is just really beautiful. And then the other one that was drying last week, I put the labels back on them so I would be able to tell which was which is kind of stupid because I don't really need it. I like can tell which is which, so maybe I just won't put them back on after this. But this is on their Stroll Glimmer base, and this is a stellina base, and it is 70% superwash merino, 25% nylon, 5% stellina. And this is the color that one is. So it's this sort of pinky, orangey, I want to say persimmon, but I don't know if it's actually a persimmon color, but like it's sort of this like very warm, pinky, orangey color. And this one is a little bit more tonal than the other one. Not like a lot, but it's definitely less solid. So, yeah, I haven't really thought too much about like what pattern this will be good for. This might be good for something like the Snosberry socks or something like that, which can handle just a little bit more variation in the yarn color because the patterning is so like distinct. So maybe that'll be what this becomes. But yeah, I really love this one too. I just think it's really beautiful. And then this one, I actually hadn't dyed when I recorded last week, but I dyed it early in the week. And this is on the Felici base, which is a 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And this one is sort of watermelon themed, and it walks a fine line because of course watermelon colors can very easily move into Christmas colors, unfortunately. So sometimes when I look at it, I feel like it looks a little bit too Christmassy, and sometimes I totally think it looks watermelon-y, but this is sort of what it looks like. So it's sort of greens and pinks and yeah, greens and pinks and reds. I don't know. This one is definitely going to, you know, it's pretty variegated. It might pool a little bit. I'm not entirely sure. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with this one. This one probably will be like vanilla socks or near vanilla socks. Because I think it's a little bit too variegated to be able to handle a lot of patterning. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. And, you know, I like Felici. I know some people have their issues with Felici, but I have multiple socks that I've knit with Felici, and it takes a lot of abuse. So, you know, while still remaining very soft, wash after wash after wash. So I'm pretty impressed with it. So I'm excited to see sort of how this knits up and compares to the, you know, striped Felici that I'm used to. But yeah, so that's that. So I still have one skein of the Hawthorne Fingering, one skein of the Stroll Glimmer, and then a skein, the one skein of Capretta, which is the MCN. I still have those that are still bare, and I have not dyed the roving that I got yet either. So I still have plenty more to dye, but it is nice to sort of rebuild my stash a little bit of sort of yarns that I have to pick from, because I was feeling for a while very sort of like limited on like what I could do because I just didn't have anything in my stash. So yeah, so that's been fun. I definitely can feel the dyeing mojo coming back just a little bit, so that's a good feeling. But yeah, I got time. Let's talk a little bit about the knit-alongs. So I say knit-alongs because we actually have two going on right now. So the one that we have going on, one of them is sort of our normally scheduled knit-along. Oh, speaking of, I drew the winner for the January-February winter knit-along earlier this week, and I totally forgot their name even because I'm just not prepared for this. But I will put up the picture of the winning item and the name of the person who won because I'm the worst podcaster ever. And yeah, so it was a hat. It was a really beautiful hat. And yeah, congrats again. I have not put your prize in the mail yet because I meant to do that yesterday and I didn't get around to it, but it will be out in the mail before I leave for spring break, so soon. And then yeah, so then our current knit-along for sort of the standard year-long knit-along stuff is botanical, and I talked a little bit about the rules for this last week, but just to rehash, right? So the big theme is botanical, which breaks down into a color of green and a technique of lace. And all the other rules are the same. I typically always link to the chatter thread, unless you're already in the Ravelry group, in which case just go back out and find the chatter thread. But on the blog and everything, I link to the chatter thread, so you can go there and see all the rules. And we have had some discussion already starting in the chatter thread, and we're only a couple days into March. But that knit along will run all the way to April 30th, and I have decided, sorry for the crinkling. Sorry. I have decided that yes, the prize for this knit along is going to be this yarn from that I got when I was in Huntsville last time. This is the yarn from Gwyn Spins, and the colorway is Lisa Frank, and it's on a really great sparkle base, and it's just super neon-y. Because the theme of the next knit along for May and June is neon, so this will fit the color theme for the next knit along. So this will be the prize. Yeah, super excited about that. And so then the other knit along that is happening right now. I mentioned this last week, but I haven't really, it was a pretty quick mention. So now there is a thread open for it. So the other knit along is the Exceedingly Vanilla Cal to celebrate my sock pattern. So basically the only rules for this are that you have to knit a pair of socks using my vanilla sock pattern, and that's it, right? It can be any color, any kind of yarn. The only rule is that it has to be with my pattern. And like I said, I will be putting up that sort of non-standard stitch count pattern as well. So that totally qualifies as well. So yeah, so far there's just one thread for it. I think I'm just gonna leave one thread because I'm meaning for it to be more of like an informal sort of knit along. So feel free to pop both chatter and FOs in that thread, and I will somehow figure it out when the time comes to draw a winner for it. But that will go through April 15th. So you have about 6 weeks to get in on that, which I think should be long enough for most people to knit a pair of vanilla socks. Like I said last week, if you happen to be one of the test knitters who test knit for me, you can totally submit your already finished FOs. Or if you already had knit a pair or were working on a pair because the pattern was published in the group sort of before it was published for real. So if you already had a WIP using that pattern, you can feel free to submit that as well. That's totally fine. So yeah, I'm super excited about that. The prize is still yet to be determined, but it'll be something fun. I'm just super excited about it. I don't know, like, because I'm not like a knitwear designer or like a graphic designer, like the idea of putting out my own patterns is still just kind of weird to me, but I really enjoy it, and it really is sort of nice to be like giving something back to the community that I feel like I really got a lot from, right? Like I put these patterns out for free. Like I don't know that I will ever charge for any patterns that I put out, just one, because I'm not a professional. And two, I just feel like I have gotten so much for free that I should contribute to some of that too. So like, it's just, I don't know, it's nice to put something out into the world and see that other people might enjoy it. So yeah, not to get gushy about it. But anyway, let's move on from that then. Right, so let's talk question of the week. So my question of the week this week is one of those ones that is sort of ambiguous, whether it's about knitting or just life in general. And this question is, what is like sort of a weird preference or thing that you like or dislike that you've never met another person who likes or dislikes that thing? So like this could be, it could be related to knitting in that maybe you, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how it could relate to knitting, but I'm sure that it could relate to knitting. I related it to things that are outside of my knitting life, and it's easy to relate this to food. I feel like it's really easy to think of this when it comes to like food preferences. So like one of my weird food preferences that I've never met anyone else who does this is to put peanut butter in plain yogurt. And this is what I eat for breakfast pretty much every single day, and like Wesley thinks it's just really weird. But I will make a bowl of plain yogurt, and then I will just spoon natural peanut butter on the top, right? So there's nothing sweet about this at all. But like, to me, it's funny because the thing I like about it is exactly the thing Wesley would not like about it, which one is that, there's no sweetness to it. And two is that like, he finds that the sort of earthiness of peanut butter and sort of the tangy creaminess of yogurt just like do not go together. And to me, I think they are like the perfect complement for each other. So it's just like one of those weird things where like people experience things differently. Another example of this I have is when I was younger, there used to be this toothpaste that I would buy, and I think it was Crest. I think Crest was the brand that put it out, but it was like orange flavored, which I know a lot of people think like that is the most disgusting thing ever, right? It's the whole like drinking orange juice after you brush your teeth thing. But it was this like orange flavored toothpaste, and I loved it. I thought it was a great flavor. And apparently it was not very popular because it is no longer made, or else I would still be buying it. But like that was another thing where it was like, I never knew another person who liked that toothpaste, but I loved it. So what is something like that for you? What is a thing that you like or really dislike that you've never met another person in your life who has that same preference? Yeah, and I think that's going to be it for the knitting type stuff for this week. So if that's all you were here for, thanks very much for hanging out, and I will see you probably not next week because like I said, I'm going to be doing some spring break traveling, so I'm not thinking I'm going to be able to record next weekend. Maybe I'll vlog it, but I'm not entirely sure. So maybe a video will appear next week, maybe not. If not, don't be alarmed. It's just because of spring break stuff. But yeah, I will for sure see you in 2 weeks. Otherwise, if you are curious about what's been going on in my life for the past week, stick around. I'm gonna make some coffee. We'll have some coffee and chit chat about my life in general. So yeah, if you are leaving at this point, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you when I see you next. Otherwise, let me make some coffee and I'll be right back. All right, so we're playing chicken with how much battery does my computer have left. So hopefully it has enough to record this, but got some coffee, and yeah, let's talk about things. So this past week was a little bit less crazy, right? I think last week when I recorded, I was talking about just how nutso my life has been. And luckily last week it quieted down a little bit, and I was able to just sort of like take a few deep breaths and everything. So that was really nice, and it made me feel like I was being a little bit like lazy. Like it almost felt like it had swung too far in the other direction, even though like objectively I know I was not being lazy. But you know, when you've been super busy for however long, and then all of a sudden you have like just a little bit of free time, you're like, oh no, this doesn't seem right. But yeah, it was a pretty chill week at work, which, you know, is because we were kind of leading up to spring break. So, you know, that was nice. Let's see, on Tuesday, so I'm taking a stats class again this semester, right? Broken record kind of a thing. But I'm taking a stats class, and we had our first test, not this past week, but the week before on Thursday. And then we got it back on Tuesday, which is pretty impressive. Especially now being a person who has to grade things, like, that's impressive. So we got it back, and I got a perfect score on it, which, like, I mean, part of me is like, yay, like, that's really awesome, and I'm super proud of myself, because, like, a perfect score, like, it's really easy to not get a perfect score, right? Like, I expected that I would do well, and I felt good about it after I got finished with the test, but, you know, I was expecting, like, probably like an A, right? Like, I'm gonna miss a few things here and there, so I'll get an A or very high B, and it'll be fine. So then he's passing the test back on Tuesday, and I got a perfect score, and I was just like, ah. Except that, like, that was definitely tempered by the fact that apparently the rest of the class did not do well. Like, average was like a D. And he was, like, my professor was not happy about it. Which, I mean, again, I can totally understand, like, being on the other side of that, like, that is really aggravating when you feel like you're putting in a lot of work and your students are just not doing well. And he was kind of saying that he feels like that is a failure on his part as an instructor, which I don't feel like it is. Like, I feel like he's been doing a really good job, and I definitely look at my classmates and I'm like, how are you guys not getting this? But then again, I am not an unbiased observer either. And so yeah, on Tuesday he spent class kind of going through the test and like going through at least how to get every problem set up, and then he was gonna let people sort of make up some of the points on the test. And so a bunch of people were, taking notes on how to set up problems that they didn't do right, and I'm just sort of sitting there following along. And at the end of class, one of the girls who sits next to me, like every single class, she's like, oh, I noticed that you weren't really writing anything down. Like, you must have done pretty well. Like, how did you study for the test? And I was kind of like, I went to grad school for physics and I have a master's degree. Like, is one of those instances where it's like, I've just been in school for a very long time, and like that's the only advantage I have over you. And like of course after class then I had to grab an old homework assignment from my professor, and he's like, oh, you did really well on that test and congratulations and everything. And I was like, yeah, but like I would have been a little bit disappointed in myself if I hadn't done really well. I mean, again, perfect score is great, but like if I hadn't done really well, I would have been sort of disappointed, because I should do better than everyone else, because I'm older than everyone else, and I've been in school longer, and I'm a faculty member, right? Like I'm just better at the school than a lot of, students going through for the first time. Anyway, needless to say, I hung the test up on the fridge in my office because it's a nice confidence booster. Otherwise, let's see. Oh, another special thing about this past week is, so we hired a faculty member, last spring? Yeah, it must have been spring of 2017. We hired a new faculty member. Except that like this process of him getting here is turning out to be really long because he's coming from the UK, right? So he's not starting until fall of this year. But, and of course, because he's so far away, like it's been sort of tough for him to like come and, do some of the preliminary work for like getting his lab set up. So he happened to be here this past week. And so I got to spend a little bit of time with him, which was nice because we were sort of talking about this new course that he's going to teach in the fall, which I'm able to give sort of a unique perspective on, because most of the students who will be going into this course are my students currently. So I kind of was telling him like what to expect as he's designing this course. And it was just nice to chat with him and get to know him a little bit better. What else? We had some weird weather, right? It was like crazy, freakishly windy on Friday. And I'm sure you guys probably can't hear it, but I can actually still hear some wind. Like, so Friday, like there was actually like wind alerts in Richmond because of like such high winds. And there were times when I was walking around campus where, like you would be almost like bent over horizontally, like trying to move into the wind. It was just crazy pants. And yesterday it was still pretty windy, but not as bad. And today again, it's sort of windy, but not as bad. But it has definitely gotten cool again here, like highs in the 50s. So I knew that the little taste we got of spring before was not going to last, but it has been a little bit of a bummer to like have it be a little bit cooler again, because I really did like when it was nice and warm. But that's okay. It'll just toughen me up a little bit because over spring break I'm going to Iowa to go see some family. So so it's going to be definitely colder there. So it's good to toughen me up a little bit before I go. But otherwise it was just a pretty chill week. It's been a pretty chill weekend. I'm actually sort of confined to the apartment all day today because I have a pork shoulder in the oven, and like that has to cook all day. And if it was in a crock pot, I'd be more than happy to just kind of like be like, you're fine. But because it's in the oven, I don't want to leave the apartment with the oven on. So I'm just kind of stuck here. I've been doing some cleaning, and then like I said, I'm going to get that pattern edited and put on the interwebs. So, kind of good to just have sort of a forced chill weekend. And I'm trying to think of what else is really of note. I read a really good book this past week called Never Split the Difference. It's a book about negotiation techniques, which sounds like kind of a book that has no real bearing on my life. And it's written by a guy who used to be a hostage negotiator for the FBI. And it's actually a really good book that I would recommend probably anybody read. And it was more so just really interesting because like when you stop viewing it through the lens of like hostage negotiations or, stuff like that, like if you think about it, a lot of the interactions we have with other people fit into the sort of form of like negotiations, right? It's basically just you are trying to get another person to do a thing that you want them to do without having to like use force, right? You're trying to convince them to do something you want them to do. And when you view it from that perspective, I thought it was a really good book, and it definitely will inform sort of like how I try to interact with people, sort of going forward and all that kind of stuff. It's a book so I got it from the library, so I was reading it on my Kindle, but I actually might buy a paper copy. Like it's a book that I liked enough to buy a paper copy of, just so I can have it around all the time. But yeah, I thought that was really good, highly recommend. And then the book I'm currently reading is a book that I'm already just really loving, and it's called Gulp, and it's by Mary Roach. And I've talked about books by Mary Roach before. She's sort of, I guess I would call her like a science writer. She sort of writes those like fun, like historical science specific topic kind of books. I've read one book before by her about like space travel, and I read another book about the military. This one is about the digestive system, and I have some of her other books on reserve at the library, but she's just a really fun writer. Like if you have a hard time with nonfiction and feel like all nonfiction is super boring, I highly suggest that you tried one of her books, because she's just fun and interesting and very like conversational without being too much so. I really like her writing, and I'm really loving this book already, and yeah, would really recommend, even though I'm maybe only like halfway through it. So yeah, it's been nice to get back into reading a little bit. Like, I think I've mentioned this before, I kind of like go in spurts with reading, where sometimes I'll read a lot and sometimes I read a little. Seems like I'm back in a time where I'm going to be reading a lot for a while, which is good. I plan to get some good reading done over vacation too, because I have nothing else to do but put my feet up and read. So that's nice. So I think that's going to be it though. I'm going to finish up my coffee and get to editing this and get to editing that pattern and all of that cool stuff. And yeah, thanks for hanging out. Sorry if this was sort of a weirdly discombobulated episode. Yeah, life is quieting down, but it's still just a little bit abnormal. So just bear with that for a little while. Plus, I also always forget that like when I record these on Sundays, typically this is the first actual talking I've done out loud all day, because I don't typically go out into the world on Sundays. I typically stay home until I record this. So yeah, I'm a little bit out of practice on talking on Sundays, so that I feel like never bodes well either. But anyway, I'm going to stop before I just ramble forever. So thank you very much for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys, if not next week, the week after. So have a good week, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.